Before I introduce our wonderful speaker for the evening, I'd like to take the opportunity to plug another Watch Me Move program. The Frist Center is partnering with Belcourt Theater to present 2 supplemental film series. Watch Me Move Kids shows on Saturdays at 10 a.m. will feature family-friendly animation classics. Watch Me Move Midnight Movies, Fridays and Saturdays at midnight, will feature animation cult classics, edgy animated shorts, and movie-themed cocktails. You can find more information about the selections on the Frist Center and Belcourt websites. And we are privileged tonight to welcome Elliot Wilhelm, the curator of film and video at the Detroit Institute of Arts. Elliot Wilhelm founded the DIA's Detroit Film Theater in 1973 and has served since then as its director. One of the most acclaimed and best attended film programs in the nation, the DFT, which features a year-round selection of new and classic world cinema, has been visited by more than 4 million moviegoers in the last 40 years. Honored as a Michiganian of the Year, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, in 1984 by the Detroit News, Wilhelm has been host of the weekly Detroit public television program Film Festival since 1995 and has been twice nominated for Emmy Awards for his writing. A lifelong Detroit area resident, Elliot attended Cass Technical High School and Wayne State University. His film reviews have appeared on Detroit Public TV, CBS Detroit, Detroit's NPR affiliate, as well as the Detroit Free Press and the Detroit News. He has taught numerous courses in film history for both the DIA and Wayne State University, and is the author of Video Hound's World Cinema, The Adventurer's Guide to Movie Watching. In 2006, Wilhelm was described in a review by Pulitzer Prize-winning Chicago Sun-Times critic Roger Ebert as a brilliant programmer and critic and a heck of a nice guy. Please join me in extending a warm Nashville welcome to Elliot Wilhelm.
Thank you, Ginny. Can you hear me? I'm going to try to use this lavalier mic to wander around a little bit. Thank you. Actually, you had me at movie-themed cocktails, which was great. I'm going to stick around here, I think, as long as I possibly can. Welcome. Have a lot of you been through the exhibition yet? Good. And for those of you who haven't, I hope you do see it. I'm just going to take one sip of this. I am coming at this topic this evening not, I hope, as a dry academic, but more as a movie fan. I love this exhibition, and one of the reasons I do is that I have always had a very close relationship with film animation. There was an animated feature film that was one of the reasons that I've been doing what I've been doing for 40 plus years at the Detroit Institute of Arts, and that is finding films that I think are important, films that I love, and presenting them to as many people as humanly possible. And one of the things I really like about this exhibition is that it is not designed specifically to be a chronological history of animation. Nevertheless, I'm going to start at what is widely regarded as the beginning. And the exhibition begins at what is widely considered to be the beginning. And you are looking at a machine called the Zoopraxiscope. It's actually a replica of the Zoopraxiscope, which was built to show some very early still images that were photographed in sequence and to give them the illusion of motion. But I am going to throw this out because this was only 135 years ago. It's a very young medium. But I have a sort of a perverse idea that this began actually a little bit earlier than that. My remote's not working, so I will use this. This isn't working either. Pardon me. It's show business. What can I tell you? And they tell you the show must go on, but that's actually not true. I can't tell you how many shows I've canceled in my day, but not having pictures on the screen is not going to prevent me from doing that, worst comes to worst. Hang on just a moment and we'll see what's going on here.
They didn't have that problem with the two practices, right?
I know. Would you like to hear a little bit about my personal history while we're waiting? All this means is that when we get it up on the screen, I'm going to have to go really fast. But you're actually getting a super reward, because at the end of my talk, even though most of the images that you're going to see, if indeed you are going to see them, are still images, images from animation history. And at the end, we have a little surprise for you, which is an actual complete film. It's about 11 minutes long. We on? Okay, thanks very much. Oh, no problem. What we're looking at right now, and when you look at the scope of time, the delay we just had doesn't really mean much, because what we're looking at now are cave paintings that were discovered in the Lascaux cave in southern France. They were discovered relatively recently, and some of you may know about these. Some of you may have seen a really interesting film about them by the German filmmaker Werner Herzog. He made a 3D movie called Cave of Forgotten Dreams, in which you actually get to see the texture of these animals on the walls of this cave. These were created some, as best we can guess, 17,000 plus years ago. And one of the things I find extraordinary about them, as the earliest known representational paintings created by our species, is when you look at these animals, you can very clearly see that they are moving. They are running, they are in motion. Some of the animals in some of the cave are depicted with more than 4 legs when they're moving, to create the illusion of motion. It's my belief that from the very beginning of man attempting to create art, he wanted, and she wanted, excuse me, to create motion and to depict motion. And all that really happened 135 years ago is that technology caught up with that impulse. The impulse has been with us since the very beginning. In the 1870s, a photographer by the name of Edward Muybridge was very interested in studying the motion of animals, not unlike the people who made those paintings in the cave. And Muybridge wanted to settle a bet. And some of this is popular folklore, but nevertheless, it's really true. He wanted to settle a bet that when a horse was at gallop, it had all 4 of its hoofs off the ground at one time. And in order to take a photograph that would prove this, he knew that it would be really futile for him to just keep taking picture after picture, hoping he'd catch it. What he did was to create a long track, and along that track were a series of tripwires, and those tripwires were connected to cameras, multiple cameras. And as the horse galloped past, each of those cameras in sequence shot a photograph of the horse. And it was his hope that eventually he would capture one that proved it. And you can see up there, third from the top, absolutely. He settled it and won his bet. That turned out to be the least important thing that Edward Muybridge discovered with this experiment. What occurred to him, and was occurring to people around the world in different ways and about different subjects, wouldn't it be great if we could take this medium of photography and all of these photographs in sequence and reconstruct them in such a way as to recreate the illusion of motion, to recreate what it was that people saw when they saw a moving horse, or when they saw anything galloping in front of them, anything moving, even some sort of vehicle or dance. Some of you are probably familiar and have copies at home of Roget's Thesaurus. Well, the Roget of Roget's Thesaurus fame was also a physician. And he came up with an observation about 50 years before these photographs were taken. It's widely described as persistence of vision, but that's not exactly how he described it originally. What he described was a term that I think is more descriptive still and kind of brilliant. He called it optical deception. And what his discovery was that when you looked at the world through the spokes of a spinning wheel, the image between the turns of those spokes was retained on your eye for just a second. It was that discovery that has made the modern motion picture possible, because when we retain that image for a fraction of a second, it becomes replaced later on by another image, and the illusion of motion becomes complete. What Muybridge did was to place his animals on a disc similar to this, and then found a machine that could recreate that motion. And, oops, pardon me. I'm no good with these. This machine, which you'll see a replica of in the Watch Me Move exhibition, indeed projects the image of that running horse on the wall. That, in a sense, meant that motion pictures were off to the races. No pun really intended. But the fact is that at that moment, a whole new art form was born, and the dream of those cave painters was realized. There suddenly were many different ways of recreating those moving images. A gentleman by the name of Méliès managed to create them by using, instead of glass plates like this, strips of paper. And on those strips of paper, he would record one photograph after the other, this one being a cat falling. And you can see this in the exhibition. The cat always lands on its feet. And this poor cat was tossed out of the window. I can't tell you how many times in order to prove this. But the very idea of doing this, and Méliès also photographed hands, different parts of the human body in motion. What you begin to notice at this point in the history of movies is that it basically began as a scientific observation and a scientific study. And as we all know, science gives birth not just to the advancement of knowledge, but to art as well. Most of us carry around iPhones these days, or if not iPhones, some other kind of smartphone. And it's a practical device designed to do some things, but when you tap on it and you see these little icons jumping around, and some of them are beautiful, and they form beautiful shapes when you move them. It's a kind of a merger of science and art. And it's something that has become, I think, a cart before the horse issue, in which someone makes a scientific advancement, and suddenly, what can you do with it that's beautiful? What can you do with it that helps us in terms of human expression? These two gentlemen, Auguste and Louis Lumière, were brothers in France who looked at these films that Méliès made and looked at the experiments of Edward Muybridge and figured to themselves, there has got to be a way to make money with this. It became very apparent that this scientific breakthrough had to, in some way, lead to a breakthrough also in what we call show business. And they came up with a device which was both a camera and a projector, the cinematograph. And it was a very handy device for doing what it was that the Lumières wanted to do, which was to take motion pictures, and by this time we had those frames of film on a strip of celluloid, a recording device that had between each image, when you saw it projected, a shutter would come down, allowing a moment of darkness between each image. That moment of darkness was imperceptible to us, but it allowed that image to be replaced by another image, and then another image after that. And if you do that fast enough, that principle of Roget's, of retention of that image on your retina and in your brain for just a fraction of a second, creates the illusion, and I stress the illusion, but the illusion of motion. So by recording lots of pictures of things and then projecting them, we were able to get to this point in history. In 1895, by this time, people had been able to see simple little motion pictures by looking through a device that we now call a Nickelodeon, but it was a hand crank device with a little eyepiece, and you look through it one person at a time, and you could see someone doing a dance or walking along a street. The Lumieres figured, if I could get this many people as are in this room, all to pay money, and show them a moving image at the same time, the turnover would be great. I could get you guys out of here, bring in another audience, and collect more money. And if there was a way to do this, it would be an extraordinary new form of entertainment. In 1895, the Lumieres figured out a projection system that would be bright enough and strong enough to put an image up on a wall. And this film, Train Pulling Into a Station, was shown to an audience for the first time. Incredible as it may seem, as the train began to approach us, just about all of the audience got up and ran out. And they did so for one simple reason. Until that night in 1895, if you saw a train coming at you, it meant only one thing, that a train was coming at you. I had this experience in my hotel right next door last night at the Union Station, and I thought of Lumiere immediately because I realized it was not a motion picture. But people were coaxed back into the theater, and what they saw were lots and lots of different images of everyday life in France, in and around Paris. They saw babies being fed, they saw lawns being watered, they saw things that were normal and regular and everyday events. But like all show business audiences, people grew tired of that, and the Lumieres decided that they wanted to do something a little bit more dramatic. So they filmed things like this serpentine dance, which is part animated and part recording of an actual dancer's performance, and they hand tinted it so that it would look really spectacular and that it would be a little bit more amazing than just ordinary life. This process was seized upon by other scientists who inadvertently made art because what they were doing was so beautiful. This is something that is known as time-lapse photography to most of us. It's a way of watching a flower bloom. How many of us have the time to stand around and watch that process? And I don't think anybody, but it was discovered that if you took one frame at a time, and then another frame, and then another frame, and then ran it very quickly together, you would be able to recreate this. And this film, The Birth of a Flower by Percy Smith, is in the exhibition. It was automatically assumed that popular forms of entertainment were perfect for the motion picture, and that turned out to be the case. Vaudeville, at the time, featured an act that was really popular, which was somebody would go up on stage and draw a caricature of somebody in the audience, or a caricature of somebody famous. And here, J. Stuart Blackton in 1906 decided, wouldn't it be great if those characters drew themselves and we didn't have to actually watch somebody do it? It would be really amusing, really interesting, and really entertaining. And it was. All of this was fun for people to watch. But this man, Georges Méliès, knew that there was something really more exciting to be done with this medium. And in a sense, he's the father of what we now consider movies. I don't know if any of you have seen Martin Scorsese's film Hugo, but in that film, there is a portrayal of Georges Méliès by Ben Kingsley, who does a really nice job, and much of the detail in the film is actually true, even though the story is fantasy. But Georges Méliès was fascinated by the motion picture, and he decided to take things further than simply photographing natural things. There's a film in the show called The Music Lover. This, by the way, is actually Georges Méliès himself. He liked to be in his films for two reasons. He was a ham, and he saved a lot of money by not paying an actor to play this part. As it goes on, you can see up on top there are many Georges Méliès heads. He tosses off his head, tosses them up to this musical bar up there, and when you see the film itself, you'll see that all of those heads are doing different things. They're all moving in different directions. Some of them appear to be talking. He made a great discovery one day, and it was a simple scientific mistake, and mistakes can lead to some of the greatest breakthroughs of them all. Georges Méliès was filming a scene, And by the way, what he wanted to do was to try and create a combination of the excitement of seeing a live theatrical performance with motion pictures. And he understood that motion pictures could bring something new to a theatrical performance. But to create the theatrical performance period, he decided to make what he called artificially arranged scenes. And those artificially arranged scenes involved costumes and sets. He built himself a pretty big studio, lots of different actors, a storyline, and he had people going in and out doing things. But one day when he was filming an actor, his camera jammed, an accident not unlike my PowerPoint here. And when his camera jammed, however, it changed history, because he had an actor who was doing something when the camera jammed. He told the actor to go take 5, leave. The camera got started again, but the camera was in a fixed position and was photographing the background that was there. When Méliès looked at the film that he had exposed, he saw the field that he was standing in, and suddenly the actor simply disappeared. And a light went off over Méliès' head, and he realized that by manipulating film in the camera, you could create incredible illusions. So when we saw his head up on top, it was the result of his running the film through the camera many times and exposing many, many different times the effect that he wanted to achieve. He was creating something that had never been seen before, something brand new. And we're talking about 1903 here. Try to imagine how quickly all of this was moving. A lot of this I'm showing you because it has to do with the beginnings of animation, since there has always been a debate as to whether or not animation and motion pictures were the same thing, whether one started before the other. But when you have images that are manipulated by the human hand for a particular effect or illusion, you are, in a sense, animating the pictures that you are either taking or creating in some way. So the history of animation and the history of film really grow closely together, and it's the reason that the Zoopraxiscope is at the beginning of the Watch Me Move exhibition. Méliès was a big fan of Jules Verne, and he decided to create a film called A Trip to the Moon, in which he had these costumed beauties loading someone into a giant cannon who was then shot off to the moon. It was unfortunate for the man in the moon because he ended up getting this thing right in his eye. And Méliès also hand-tinted his early films, by the way. This image is quite a famous one, and this film became fantastically, I'm going a little faster than I wanted to, fantastically popular. Méliès distributed his films all over the world, but he was a terrible businessman, really, really awful businessman. And he sold his films directly to theaters rather than renting them, so he ended up becoming impoverished. But later on in life, France recognized him as a hero, and all worked out well. The other thing that was really popular at the time were comic strips. And what more natural thing could there be for comic strips than to bring them to life? And an artist by the name of Winsor McCay gave this exhibition its name. He has a film called Little Nemo Moving Comics, which you can see in the exhibition. And what he did was to simply take his characters from his comic strips and bring them to life, to animate them. And he also went on to create the very first dinosaur movie. When you think about the things that animation can show you and the places that animation can take you, every kid in the world has been fascinated by dinosaurs and would love to run into one and would love to see one somehow. How can you do it? Well, Winsor McCay figured he could draw one on film, an animation that could come to life. This is Gertie the dinosaur from 1914. Gertie is the friendliest brontosaurus in history. And she's got this little mastodon who's her friend. And in the film, Winsor McCay is seen talking to Gertie, giving Gertie instructions on what to do and to make people happy. And Gertie does so. It was only a few steps away from that a brilliant man by the name of Willis O'Brien, it took 10 years, but nevertheless, Willis O'Brien, and you notice a difference in this image than the other images that you've seen. The other images were drawn. This image of a brontosaurus and what looks like used to be called an allosaurus, are three-dimensional in a sense. They're models, they're clay models. What Willis O'Brien did which was also revolutionary, was to build models on sets of his dinosaurs with metal skeletons. And he moved them and then took a frame. And then he moved them slightly again and took another frame. And then he moved them slightly again. Try to imagine what a laborious process this was. Well, in 1925, he created an epic film called The Lost World. And The Lost World was a story of a dinosaur that ultimately got to London and tore up the city. And it was referred to by Steven Spielberg's sequel to Jurassic Park, which was subtitled The Lost World. Willis O'Brien, by the way, became obsessed with this art form of what we call stop-motion animation. And in 1933, he created the most famous stop-motion animation figure in the history of the world. Here he is working on that film, and here's the result of it. King Kong climbed the Empire State Building in 1933. Audiences couldn't believe what they were seeing, and yet Kong himself was only about this tall and was the result of years of effort by a team of stop-motion animators who were able to create an entirely new world. Dinosaurs are still with us in film, and I mentioned Spielberg before. This is an image from the original Jurassic Park in 1993. And granted, this dinosaur was created by computer imagery, but it's the artistry that I feel is really important in creating that sense of wonder. These are all different tools that artists have used to bring these impossible images and impossible worlds to life. I want to go back for 1 second to Winsor McCay, who did something truly amazing in 1916. The Lusitania was sunk, and there was, of course, no filmed record of it. Until not that many years ago, no one had ever filmed a plane crash. Now, when a disaster happens, it's highly unusual for someone not to have been there with a video camera of some kind and create it. Winsor McCay was commissioned in 1916 to chronicle this terrible disaster of the sinking of the Lusitania. And he did something remarkable and brilliant and auspicious. He created what is really the first animated photojournalism. He decided what it must look like for the Lusitania to have been sunk, how horrifying it must have been, how long it probably took, showing people jumping off the sides of the ship, showing the ship sinking, and showing the damage and the explosions as they took place. It's a serious use for this animation art form, but one that was absolutely stunning and still is when you see it. It was an amazing thing that so early in the creation of this medium, people began racing off into different directions to tell stories of different kinds and to create different worlds. This amazing artist, Lottie Reininger in Germany, did something with cutouts that I think for many of you, you'll see that they resemble shadow puppets, possibly Chinese shadow puppets if you're familiar with them, which were manipulated by little sticks underneath a screen, a translucent screen. Well, these were not manipulated by little sticks under a translucent screen. These were animated one frame at a time. Lottie Reininger created these beautiful backgrounds to tell a story from the Arabian Nights in a film that is actually the oldest feature animated film that we know of. It runs about 65 minutes, and it's being shown in its entirety in Watch Me Move. It's fantastically beautiful. I'm going to skip past a couple of these because I'm running a little bit long. This, in 1919, is the original version of Felix the Cat. This was another comic strip created by a man by the name of Otto Mesmer. But I put Pat Sullivan's name on this slide because Pat Sullivan took credit for Felix the Cat, sort of because he put up the money to make the film. But Otto Mesmer was really the creator of Felix, although he was called Tom here. And ultimately, as many of the characters in the characters section of Watch Me Move, they never went away. They grew, and audiences became more and more fond of them, and ultimately, the descendants of this cat, Felix, found a really great long life on television on Saturday mornings. All right, cut to California in the 1920s, the late 1920s. A guy from Kansas City who was a swell businessman and a pretty good artist, but an even better businessman, named Walt Disney, opened a studio. And that studio began creating animated cartoons in the same way that from my hometown, Henry Ford began to create automobiles. And that was not necessarily to invent them, but to invent a new way of creating them that was more efficient and made them work better. Disney hired artists to do different aspects of his animation. He had story people, he had ink and paint people, he had people who designed backgrounds, foregrounds, characters, every aspect of a movie. And in this film, The Skeleton Dance, he just creates a really wonderful, creepy Halloween feel. But he's most famous for this character, who in 1928 made his debut in a sound cartoon called Steamboat Willie. Mickey Mouse became the most famous actor in the world, next to Charles Chaplin. Well, Charles Chaplin in the 1920s was probably one of the wealthiest human beings on the face of the earth, and certainly the most famous actor. It was Disney's feeling that if he could create an actor who would be just as popular as Chaplin, but that he never had to pay, he never had to put in a hotel room, he never had to worry about waking up with a woman he shouldn't be waking up with the next day, all of the things you have to worry about with actors, and you know, Mickey took direction very well too. If that were possible, he would be one of the wealthiest human beings on earth. Well, we all know that Disney went on to create an empire, and many people feel that it was an empire based on this mouse. If you read the trade paper, show business trade paper Variety, the Disney studios are still referred to as the Mouse House. Mickey had a problem, though. Mickey was very good. He was a very, very good character. He was sweet. And they decided to spice him up a little bit by having him embark on some adventures that were slightly mischievous. The result, because of his enormous popularity, was that parents from all over the world wrote to the Disney studios and said, "We are never going to pay money. My kid is never going to see another Mickey Mouse cartoon because this has got to stop." Well, ultimately, Walt got the message, and Mickey became exclusively the good character in his studio. He developed another one. Donald was designed exclusively for his temper, and he would lose his temper frequently, whereas Mickey did not. What we're seeing here are characters who we know. We know them now. They're people whose personality traits, and I just described them as people inadvertently, whose personality traits are clear as day to us. Their roles are defined, in a sense, for eternity. And Disney became an enormous success by doing this. Here's a stamp from the Maldives, not that long ago, in which there's Donald blowing his stack, which is what he does and what he's known for. But in America, we get a Mickey stamp, and he's happy as can be, piloting still his little tugboat. So Mickey's place in history is assured, and kids who go to Disneyland and wear the little hat will never have to worry about anybody thinking that they're bad. However, there was a wolf in the woods in all of this. Walt Disney's animation was considered West Coast animation, but in Big Bad New York in the 1920s were two brothers, Max and Dave Fleischer. And in the 1920s, they were living through the jazz age. They were living through Prohibition and speakeasies and jazz and low-down singing and nightclubs. That's what they liked. That's the world that they knew. And they saw no reason why animation shouldn't embrace that world as well. They created a series of cartoons that they called Out of the Inkwell. And out of that inkwell came a clown, Coco the Clown, who you see here. This isn't an actual shot from one of their films, but kind of a mock-up of what they were all about. Coco was seen in the early cartoons actually coming out of the inkwell. That was the trademark. And Coco interacted with his creator, Max Fleischer, on screen by combining animation and live action. And these cartoons featured jazz singers like Cab Calloway doing songs like St. James Infirmary Blues. And that stuff was not considered appropriate for children. There were nightclubs shown in these films, but Fleischer's films and the Fleischer Studios became enormously successful, and particularly with this character. It began with a character on the left who was a dog, Bimbo the dog, and if you take a look in the center, you'll recognize Betty Boop. Betty Boop began in a slightly different way. Take a look at these ears. Betty was a dog, and I'm not describing her physical characteristics in terms of, having a date that you don't like. I'm saying that she was a canine, and she was a friend of Bimbo's here, and they were together. Of course, the short skirts and all of that were part of it. But there was, kind of an outcry among the public. They loved Betty Boop, but they were upset at the fact that she was a dog. So the Fleischers fixed her in a sense, and the dog ears became earrings. But what Max and Dave Fleischer's little perverse joke was that she and Bimbo, who remained a dog, still were together all the time romantically. So however you want to take that, that's up to you. But the Fleischers went on to become not as successful in a business sense as the Disney studios, but they created enormously iconic characters. Popeye the Sailor was a comic strip by Seagar that was a very popular one. When they brought Popeye to life, and they gave us the Popeye the Sailor theme song, Popeye himself became one of the most popular cartoon characters of all time. Ultimately, the Fleischers moved to Florida. Their studio became less and less inventive, and they created a series of cartoons based on Superman in 1941. It was the first incarnation of Superman on screen, and even though the cartoons are really good, they were never really commercially successful, but they kept on working at their various projects. But in the meantime, out in California, Disney was trying a grand experiment. I told you about the Adventures of Prince Ahmed, which was the oldest surviving feature film, the longest animated film. In 1937, Disney decided that he could create a feature film that was animated for audiences around the world. Now, until this time, all of the films that we've been talking about, with the exception of Prince Ahmed, had been shorts that were shown generally in front of feature films. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, on the other hand, was a major project. And you know how technologically there's a warning about everything. We hear about the new thing that could cause this and the new thing that could cause that. Incredible as it may seem, as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was being prepared for release, there were groups of physicians who were en masse as organizations sending notes to the Disney studios saying that an animated film with bright colors that lasted an hour and a half would cause irreparable brain damage among large portions of the audience and induce seizures. And the Disney people were taken aback, and they actually got a legal defense ready and believed that it was, and they had doctors ready on their side. They unleashed Snow White into the world in 1937, taking that big, bold step, and created one of the most popular entertainments in the world, creating a musical film based on a great fairy tale, putting their own spin on it. And they followed it 3 years later with a film that I consider the masterpiece of the Disney studios, Pinocchio. The masterpiece probably for many reasons, the storytelling, but most of all, the detail of the animation in Pinocchio, the handcrafted quality of this film, the power of its story, although I'm told by a lot of women that it's a guy movie, and that the story of Pinocchio becoming a real boy is not necessarily a universal story. I don't know if that's true, but I know that there are a lot of people who are really moved by it and excited by it. And it's a magnificent piece of storytelling that really puts the Disney studios, in terms of feature filmmaking, on the map. In terms of business, they had one other brilliant, and I know I've got to run, they have one other brilliant thing that they came up with at this point. Motion pictures in general were considered to have a very short shelf life at this period. Entertainments would be shown for 2-3 years, filmed entertainments, and then they would be put away by studios because they assumed clothing styles changed, acting styles changed, new films would come along. People wouldn't want to see those old films again, so they didn't really take care of them. Disney believed that his fairy tale animated features were going to live forever. And the trick would be to put them away for 7 years and then let them out into the world again, so that each successive new generation would be taken to see these films by their parents who had been enchanted by them years before. So one of the great benefits of that is that the negatives of the Disney films were always kept in absolutely pristine condition. So we have so much material from the Disney studios that is in great shape because he believed it was going to be economically rewarding down the road. The characters were not lost. The popularity of cartoon characters were not lost, and other studios jumped in as well. Warner Brothers created a series of characters for their Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies who were really rascally, like this Rascally Rabbit, or Wascally Wabbit as he's more popularly known. Bugs Bunny was a real wise guy, and the Warner Brothers studios got a reputation for creating characters that were not sweet and gentle, but that always had some kind of agenda. Donald was a really popular duck. So Warner Brothers figured we can create a duck who's really a pain in the neck. And I'm using that part of the anatomy loosely. But Daffy went through all sorts of things. And there's a great cartoon that I recommend to you highly if you get a chance to see it. It's called You Ought to Be in Pictures, in which Daffy tries to talk Porky Pig out of his movie contract because he wants to take his place. It's an incredible film. It combines live action with animation. But there's an equally and probably more incredible film in the exhibition. Here's an image from it. It's called Duck Amuck. In 1953, the great animator Chuck Jones put Daffy Duck into what appeared to be an ordinary cartoon. And as he walks in, there's backgrounds, there's a story, but suddenly the backgrounds change on him. His physical shape changes, his clothes change. He's in the Alps in one moment, and then he's on a beach in the other. It begins to drive him absolutely crazy. And the cartoon is a masterpiece of both animation and surrealism. It's something that Salvador Dali would have been very pleased to have created. And he's trying to find out who the artist is who is doing this to him. And ultimately, he finds out it's Bugs Bunny. Before we, move on to the little film I'm going to show you, there are so many things, so many wonders that animation inspired in people. Abstract artists weren't necessarily interested in characters, but were interested in the fact that they could now create pictures that moved. Oskar Fischinger worked for a filmmaker, worked for the filmmaker Fritz Lang on a science fiction film of his in the 1920s in Germany, and decided that he could make films with abstract shapes and designs and colors that could simulate music. This film, Radio Dynamics, features all kinds of magnificent imagery and beautiful movements, but it's completely silent. You're supposed to supply the music yourself. When Disney created his version, which was Fantasia, he made sure that the images and the music were perfectly synchronized. And in a sense, while I love Fantasia, it was a matter of nothing being left to the imagination. I would tell you a quick story about Fantasia. I wasn't going to do this, but many of you have seen it, and you probably know there's a sequence of dinosaurs in Fantasia set to Igor Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. They had to cut it. They had to cut the piece of music because they wanted the scene to be just 18 minutes long. Stravinsky was alive at the time Fantasia was released and was invited to a private screening of Fantasia at the Disney studios. They showed him the sequence. Stravinsky was beyond furious. He was throwing things, not just because of the fact that they cut The Rite of Spring, but because he thought the pictures on the screen were, who said this is what I had in mind? It's a piece of music. How dare you? He stormed out of the studio. He went through the back door. At the front door was a whole lot of press that Disney had invited to this event, Mr. Stravinsky watching this. The greatest PR man in history, I don't think anybody knows his name, was asked, what was Mr. Stravinsky's reaction? And this kid said, Mr. Stravinsky was visibly moved. Other cultures have used animation in ways to get messages across, in ways in which they can export, like a message in a bottle, messages and urgent messages to the rest of the world in ways that perhaps their own repressive governments haven't even noticed. In 1965, in Czechoslovakia, an animator by the name of Jerry Turnke used the stop-motion animation method to create a film about an artist who is prevented from creating what he wants to create by this giant hand that tells him what it is that the state wants him to create and insists that that's what he's going to do. It's done wordlessly and it's done brilliantly. It's a 15-minute film. This magnificent Polish film called Tango, which you'll see, is a kind of an abstract meditation on all of humanity, the passage of time. In this room, you will see what appear to be hundreds of figures coming in and out, interacting with each other in different ways over different periods of time. It's mesmerizing, it's beautiful, it has the effect of a work of art that consists of cutouts. All sorts of other countries have done similar things, artists have done similar things. Jan Svankmajer, also a Czech, created this magnificent film, which is shown on a large screen in Watch Me Move, called Dimensions of a Dialogue, in which we can read almost anything we want into what communication ultimately leads to, how it can happen, how it can be destroyed at the drop of a hat. And back to characters for a minute. Fairy tales are a perfect subject for motion pictures. On the left, you will see an image from a early film by Ray Harryhausen called The Story of Rapunzel. Ray Harryhausen went on to create other stop-motion animated classics that kids like me grew up loving, like The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Jason and the Argonauts, and so many others. And on the right, a film that you're going to see a complete film by in just a few seconds if I ever stop talking. Ladislav Starowicz is a Polish animator who made films in Russia and then ultimately moved to France. And he's got a film here in the exhibition called The Tale of the Fox that's an hour long. And I watched part of it today with a couple of people who had no idea what they were walking in to see, stayed to watch it all, and were just beside themselves with delight as they described the different sight gags that they saw. It's an extremely witty film. This stop motion technique was picked up by Tim Burton, who many of you know. This is one of his early films called Vincent, made in 1982, about a little boy named Vincent Malloy, who didn't want to be Vincent Malloy. He wanted to be Vincent Price. And he loved darkness and scary things and the concept of everything leading to death. And Vincent is a gloomy kid, kind of an early goth kid. And what's great about this film, in addition to the animation and the storyline, is that Tim Burton managed to get Vincent Price to do the narration itself. In England, Nick Park of Wallace and Gromit fame was doing fantastically inventive things. Here's a series of interviews with animals in which they talk like ordinary people about their environments in their little everyday British accents, about what it's like to live in a zoo. It's hilarious and it's poignant. Ron Rake is a man who found a lot of children's books, Dick and Jane type readers, and he used the images in them to create a really subversive, horrifying, and also beautiful movie about kids discovering the world in the fashion of a Dick and Jane reader. Much of what they discover and do in this film is disturbing. And it's one of the reasons that it's in a special section of the exhibition reserved for non-young people. And it really belongs there. This is a film I wanted to talk about that's not in the exhibition, but I'm going to race through here because we need to get finished. In 1982, the Disney studios were back trying to get hip, trying to figure out what it is that these teenagers today want. They created this enormously ambitious movie about what was very popular at the time, the early days of video games. Many of you might remember seeing Tron in theaters. I certainly do. And I also remember something quite amazing, which is at the beginning of the film, theater was packed with kids that looked like they were video gamers and were interested in this, when the words Walt Disney Presents came on the screen. And a collective groan went through the audience. And it's not because they hated Walt Disney, it's that they felt they were too old for Walt Disney. So Disney was right in that they needed a little bit of rethinking and rebranding. In this film, Jeff Bridges ends up being sucked into an actual video game, and we see through computer animation what the results of that game are. I found audiences generally to not be particularly excited by Tron, and the audiences at the time weren't, because to me, there are a few things more boring than watching somebody else play a video game. And so what you want naturally as you're watching Tron is to take some control over things. And I think it's one of the reasons that the video game version of Tron that came out after the movie ended up being more popular than the movie. Steve Jobs we associate with Apple Computer. But he also was one of the pioneers and founders of a company called Pixar. And along with John Lasseter, Steve Jobs created this magnificent little short film called Luxo Jr. to prove that anything could be given through animation a personality. And these two little table lamps have enormous personality in Luxo Jr. This became kind of the calling card for Pixar, and eventually that lamp showed up in the logo of all of the great Pixar features that followed, including Toy Story in 1995, up through Toy Story 3 in 2010. It was computer animation coming of age and learning how to create believable characters. They're still having trouble with human skin, but they're doing pretty well in terms of computer animation otherwise. The genius of Pixar was not the incredible technology that they have and have now at their disposal. There's nothing wrong with that. But what was great about the early days of Pixar and the present days of Pixar is that they placed story first. And the story and our emotional involvement with these characters is what matters. It's one of the reasons Superman is still with us. And a Superman movie is being shot in Detroit with Ben Affleck as I speak. This is the early Fleischer version of Superman. Computer animation has brought us to The Hulk in 2003, a film that had to be remade a couple of years later because despite the talent of Ang Lee, it wasn't emotionally involving. It was more of a technological exercise than anything else. And yet Ang Lee didn't give that up. Anybody who's seen The Life of Pi and watched that amazing 75-minute sequence in the center of the film with the tiger, Richard Parker, in the boat with one individual, may be surprised to learn that there isn't an instant of that tiger that is a real tiger. It's all computer generated and is so brilliantly done and is so amazingly designed in terms of combining live action with computer animation that it's really something of a landmark. In Japan, something different was being done with animation. Anime is a way of showing us stories in a grand and spectacular fashion, but at a different pace than a lot of American animated films tend to use. Princess Mononoke is a very grand adventure. And Spirited Away, one of my favorites, is actually won the Academy Award for Best Feature, is about a little girl who gets separated from her mom and dad. Actually, they get turned into pigs, if you want to know. And she gets afraid and runs away. That is the great hook in all of the great Disney classics, too, which is something happens to your parents. And it happened in Bambi, it happened in Dumbo, it happens in Pinocchio. It hits kids below the belt, but nevertheless, it gets their attention. In Spirited Away, she learns to grow up by ending up in a bathhouse that is frequented by spirits. And she learns to serve them, and she learns to become tolerant of them. Hayao Miyazaki made a wonderful film for young girls, as many of his films are, called Kiki's Delivery Service, about a young witch who is on her first flight. We showed this film at the DIA when we did a series of Miyazaki films last summer, and I thought it was a film that a lot of kids didn't know about. We started the film, and I took this photograph. All these little girls had come to the movie with their little red bows on, just like Kiki has in the movie. And they were so wide-eyed and so excited at watching this film that I realized that these worlds of animation that some of us just drop in on and check in on and look at or file away as that's a style, that's a style, that's a style, these things become very important and become worlds to new audiences and to young viewers. It's an exciting medium. It may have taken 17,000 years to get here, but in reality, the 135 years since the discovery of motion pictures and the invention of animation is just like that in the history of art and certainly in the history of the world. But when you look at what's been created, I think it's magical, I think it's miraculous. And as Arthur C. Clarke said, any technology that is sufficiently advanced will appear to us as magic. And this is what motion pictures and what animation can do. Not a dry history of animation, perhaps, but one that I have felt and wanted to share with you. If you still have time and want to stick around, I want to show you a little treat. I showed you a still from a film by Ladislav Starowicz, the Polish animator, and I want to show you a movie that was the result of the dilemma that he had that actually brought him to animation to begin with. He was another one of those scientists who wanted to use motion pictures to study something. And what he wanted to study was insects. Starowicz was a scientist obsessed with insects. And he wanted to make a film about beetles. He discovered that the beetles not only didn't like the bright lights, and they didn't want to wait for him to get the shot right, but they also died under the hot lights. So he was losing actors right and left. And he decided in 1911, when he started this project, that what he would do was build his own beetles. And he created, out of rubber, fabric, little pipe cleaner type legs, the beetles who would act in his story. But he went so much further. In the movie you're about to see, which I consider to be a little masterpiece, a story unfolds that you may find incredible for its day, even in a feature film with actors. But a feature film with animated beetles, I think you're going to be quite surprised when you see it. I'm going to show it to you. If you are polite enough and patient enough to stay, and I apologize to everybody at the Frist who organized this for my going so long. I will be happy to take questions and talk with you after. But right now, I would like you to see The Cameraman's Nightmare. Excuse me, Cameraman's Revenge. Sorry. I just wanted you to see it, even though it's not in the show. Anyway, thanks for your patience tonight. Does anybody have any questions? Anything I can answer? Everybody has strong feelings about movies, but yes?
You said there was a movie that inspired you to have a lifelong love of film. What was that movie?
Yeah, the question was a movie that inspired me to have a lifelong love affair with movies. It was actually buried in there, and it was Pinocchio. You notice that I started getting a little bit sloppy when talking about Pinocchio. My parents took me to see it when I was 6 years old in a big old downtown Detroit theater, and I guess I was a basket case. I don't remember, but it was really an enthralling experience for me. But then, in 1980, I was at a film festival in Telluride, Colorado, and there was a Technicolor print of Pinocchio that had been preserved by the Disney Studios that they ran, and I hadn't seen the movie since the 1950s. And I saw it that day, and everything came rushing back to me. The power of the fairy tale, the power of the images, the detail, the color, the music, everything about it had been sort of burned into me. And I would imagine that for most of you, there are certainly childhood film experiences like that. Sometimes those films don't live up to our expectations when we get older. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they get even better. And I know we're running late, but if you've got questions or if you want to talk to me afterwards, yes?
Well, they mentioned that you were a friend or whatever of Roger Ebert, a favorite critic of all time. I just wondered if you had an interesting story about this movie that you remember about.
Oh my gosh.
Well, your best.
Yeah, I don't know about a story about Roger Ebert, but I think what's interesting about my relationship with Roger is how we met. There was a film festival we both used to go to, and we were both obsessive about sitting in the back of a theater on the aisle. And at this particular festival venue, we wanted the same seat. And we met fighting over a seat. He would see me standing in front of the theater and got furious. But when I really got to know him was actually a little bit before that. And I'll tell you a story that I think says something about Roger Ebert. It was at a radio station in Detroit. And in the old days, the 1980s, people would still come to your local town to do promotion on things. Roger had a TV show, of course, with Gene Siskel. And they both very generously one night, by the way, came to the DIA to do a benefit performance for us at no charge, doing Oscar predictions. I'll never forget that. But Roger Ebert was sitting next to me. I was the film critic on this particular station, WJR-AM, and Roger Ebert was there to promote his TV show. And we really, at that point, really barely knew each other. And suddenly, there was a commercial. And Ebert turned to me and said, "Have you seen The Terminator?" It had just come out. And I said, "No, I haven't seen it yet." He said, "You've got to see it." And he said, "There are these scenes in it where, Schwarzenegger is just not what you expect. And there are these scenes in it where," and he's describing the point of view shots of Arnold Schwarzenegger as he's going down the street killing people. And his excitement level is such that I'm thinking to myself, he doesn't really know me. And he's this excited and telling one person, he's not reserving it for the broadcast. He's not reserving it for when he's on. It's genuine, real enthusiasm for the movies. I think that's the reason he ended up getting a Pulitzer Prize years before that. And I remember reading him in the Chicago papers before he had a national TV show, reviewing Japanese science fiction movie called Inframan. It's a terrible film, but he described why he loved it. What about its awfulness appealed to him? He was the kind of critic, and there weren't that many, Pauline Kael might have been another, and Andrew Sarris was another, who you would read even though you had no intention of ever seeing the movie they were writing about, because they were interesting writers. And they wrote about more than just the film that was on the screen. They didn't just have movies as a reference. They actually had real life as a reference, and the other arts as a reference, and human experience as a reference. So I'm happy to say that there's a new documentary about Roger that's about to come out, made by Steve James, the man who made Hoop Dreams, which was a movie that Roger was very, very fond of. So, I mean, I've got a lot of other stories about him, but that day in which I saw his enthusiasm being expressed, he couldn't control it. It was pouring out of him, and he had no audience other than one person he barely knew. So you can't beat that. That's the real deal. Anybody else? In the back? That's you, yep.
How did your experience at Cass Tech impact your life?
Do you know Cass Tech?
My father lived there.
Did he?
I noticed that it was mentioned in the introduction. I was just fascinated by that.
I didn't know it was going to be mentioned tonight, but it was a school where, at an early stage, a high school in Detroit, where you meet a lot of interesting people and a lot of people who are interested in the arts, people who are choosing to go there for a kind of a liberal arts education that's a little bit different from your ordinary. So I met a lot of people who were smarter than I was, and it was a great thing for me to rub elbows with chess geniuses and people who I just kind of idolized right away. And it taught me a lot about the world that I think my local high school might not have. It may have anyway, I don't know. But going there was a key point for me. And I had some teachers, like all of us have at wherever we've gone to school, who were very important to us and taught us things. One was an English teacher who I had for a great books class, who I really loved. But those things I think we all have in our youth about the schools we go to. My primary school was my neighborhood movie theater, and I clearly was not athletic, wasn't then, am not now. I have nothing against it, but I spent beautiful sunny Sunday afternoons and Saturday afternoons in the Royal Theater, the Varsity Theater, the Mercury Theater, whatever was showing a double bill of bad science fiction movies about giant something from another planet. And I just couldn't get enough of it, and eventually discovered that there were even better movies than those out there, and never got over how they worked and the magic of their creation. I had heard from many people that if you know too much about movies, and I've taught film classes where people go in with that attitude, if you know too much about movies, it's going to spoil it. If you know too much about how animation works, it's going to spoil the illusion. It's going to spoil the effect. It's nonsense. All that happens is that your respect for a really good film rises when you find one. You're less easily fooled, you're less easily duped, and you're more willing to embrace something that's truly extraordinary. It's not that it's a trick. It is an illusion, but it's an art form like any other. And it's like saying, that painting doesn't impress me because I know it was made with a brush and some paint. Those tools are nothing. It's what comes out of that handiwork that's amazing. So I've always been fascinated by the mechanics of it. I got to be an extra in a movie once and be on a real movie set with real movie stars. And it was one of the most fun experiences of my life. And it was in 2003, which I would tell you all about, but it's a little boring. But I had another friend in Detroit, Elmore Leonard, who was a great crime writer and wrote Get Shorty. And he also wrote the sequel to Get Shorty, which was not as great. It was called Be Cool. But the same character, Chili Palmer, was in it. And there was a character named Elliot Wilhelm, who was named after me because Elmore was a generous guy and was on my board at the DIA and would do this periodically as a kind of a benefit if you bid on having your name as a character in a movie. So I got to be a 300-pound gay Samoan hitman. And he was a great character. And he was played in the movie by The Rock. So I got to actually be in the background during a shot in which The Rock and John Travolta meet. And John Travolta says to The Rock, I hear you're Elliot Wilhelm and you want to be in the movies. And I got to be in that shot too. So it was really fun. That was my brush with movie stardom. It's all over at that point. Long-winded answer like everything I do. I apologize. Yes?
One of my favorite animators is Len. And could you talk a little bit about people who actually have, I don't know if you call them animators.
He's an animator, and he's in this show, as is, for example, Stan Brakhage, who is an experimental filmmaker who painted directly on the film in the example that's shown in Watch Me Move. I consider it animation. All of the abstract artists who worked to create moving images were absolutely animators. And the thing that intrigued so many of them was not just that they could control color and movement, and in some cases sound, but also the new thing that was being added, more than movement, or at least equally important to movement and sound, and that was duration. We can walk by a painting and spend as long as we want looking at whatever part we want, but a filmmaker controls what we see and how long we're looking at it, and how long it takes for each image that that person creates to go by and be perceived. So yes, absolutely consider Len Lai to be an animator.
This might be a little bit out of your expertise.
Most things are.
I mean, in a different direction. But I'm really curious about the whole genre of animation and how does Barbican, the city of London, become the entity that carries this, this show and just the idea of a museum, that would carry this exhibit.
Right.
It just is curious to me. I don't know anything about it. It's like a hotel, and it's just curious. How does this end up there? And what is a museum of animation and film? Like the future? I don't know.
Well, the Barbican was very audacious in putting this show together and in allowing it to travel to institutions like the Frist. Question was about the Barbican Museum, where Watch Me Move originated. The fact is that there are a number of museums around the world that look at film very seriously. Some museums look at it as a part of what they do. There is a new museum right now that the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences is constructing in Los Angeles, which looks to be something very spectacular. But at the same time, in New York City, the Museum of Modern Art is a champion of film of all sorts, not just live action film, but animation as well. It began about the same year the DIA began showing films, 1927, but the Museum of Modern Art has an Academy Award to show for its work. It's a matter of recognizing film. And a lot of people have this difficulty because it is such a young medium. It is not really 17,000 years old, as I implied, but just a little over a century. And it's like when people call something an instant classic, it makes my hair stand up too. How do you create and define what an art form is? And at what point in history do you say, yes, it is an art form? It's my belief, based on lots of reasons, that film is an art form. And there are a lot of museums who agree with that. There are some that don't. But it's an art form that is evolving and is changing and may not look in 50 years like it looks now. But the great films of the past need to be preserved. And a lot of museums understand this and make it their business to put films on display. Some museums are more important in terms of preserving film and storing it and saving it for the future. Other museums are much more energetic when it comes to presenting those films, getting them out there to the public. And it's an urgent job because, as you may know, because of the fragility of film and because the original stock on which film was made, and I'm talking about once celluloid came in, more than half of the movies made before 1950 are gone. They don't exist at all in any form. They have disintegrated, they have been thrown away, they have simply been misplaced and have disappeared. There may be random copies around the world that people don't know about, but even more recent films are in danger of serious deterioration, and there is a constant effort to try and keep those films alive. Every year, the Library of Congress designates 25 films to be national treasures. And what they do, and they're of all different kinds. They're films that range from Singin' in the Rain to the Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination. I mean, that's how different they can get. But those films are designated as national treasures. That enables them to get funding to make sure those films are restored and preserved in proper fashion. But you'd be shocked to know how many relatively recent movies disappear. That's why I made a point of mentioning the fact that the Disney Studios has always been interested in film preservation, really for economical reasons. And that's why a lot of the studios are interested in it now, because of this new life that films have been given through home video and DVD and cable TV. Older films that people thought would never really have any value again, beginning around 1963 when NBC started a program called Sunday Night at the Movies. Suddenly, older films were valuable again. So a lot of it does come down to money. But to answer your question, there are museums all over the world that take film very seriously as an art form. So the Barbican, as remarkable as it is in putting this exhibition together, has a lot of good company. Anyone else? If not, oh yes, I'm sorry.
Why is it sometimes public perception of the movie may be different from critical perception? And, maybe the public is voting with their wallet or just by stars versus what the critic perception.
Well, the question is about why critics' opinions can sometimes diverge from public opinions. That's something that we've always seen. We've seen it in literature. We've certainly seen it in art, in the history of art in general. We'll always see that. We also see critics jumping the gun and changing their opinions years later on things that they may have hated or things that they may have loved. And the same is true of the public. It's always a temptation to judge things instantaneously, but the gift of giving things time is something that tempers everybody's opinion. So it's not unusual to me to see that great difference of opinion. And sometimes there can be simply groundswells in the critical community that we would commonly refer to as the emperor's new clothes, to be polite. I want to thank you so much for your attention and for being here this evening. It's been a real pleasure. So thanks. And if there's anything I can answer for you outside, let me know.